It's time for the answers for DD259. Oh, thank you so much. I got lots of messages, lots of email saying that you are happy that DD is back. You waited 9 months. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's busy, so many things happening, so many things on my plate. My plate was very full, is very full. But I'm doing my best to manage my time a little bit better, and it's nice to be back. So how was DD259, the challenge? Some of you did great, but as expected there were a couple of tricky words and some great English to learn. So let's go ahead and first of all what we're going to do is go over the answers. So we're going to listen again. I'm going to give you the answers, teach you the pronunciation, the natural American style of pronunciation. Then we'll listen again, and most of you will be like, oh yeah, it's easy. And then I'll explain the situation so that it's easy to understand. This is something that we studied a long time ago, almost a year ago, in DDM. If you're not a DDM member, you should seriously consider. In DD260 Challenge, I'll give you the address. The address is www.letsmasterenglish.com. Go to the website and choose Join Classes, and then you'll find all the information. Okay? All right, let's listen to DD259 Challenge one more time, and then I'll give you the answers.
You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her.
You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. Oh yeah. Here you go. You know what you ought to do. You should go to her office and heckle her. That's it. Thank you very much. I'll see you next week. No, of course not. Okay, lots of problems. This was really tough, especially right here. New word for many of you. New York accent in this case. Let's go back. Grammatically, we should have a do, but there is no do. He starts with you know. This guy's name is George. You know, you know. Now, when we have the word you, there's actually 3 pronunciations. Some Americans say you, some say ya, some say yeah. And that's the case here. You know. So, many Americans, they write you know like this. Because the sound is, you know. Now, what you? Once again, you, ya, ya. Ya is the most common. So let's put a ya here. We have another rule. T plus Y equals CH. D plus Y equals J. T, Y, we get a CH. You know what ch? You know what ch? No, ch. You know what ch? You know what ch? You know what you ought to do? Now, we have the word ought to. So, the American pronunciation, this is an AW sound. AW. Aw, aw, aw. When we do the AW, these are your upper teeth. These are your lower teeth. And usually in your mouth, your tongue is like this. Right? Something like that. So, when we do the AW sound, what happens is this is the lower mouth, and if you feel right about here, it starts to get soft, right? The skin is like this, but it's like really soft, right? So in this soft part of the skin, you stick your tongue. You stick your tongue in the soft part and drop the jaw. The sound comes straight out. That is the AW sound. AW. Ought to. Now, next step. TT. When we have 2 T's next to each other, 2 sounds similar, we can connect the sounds and keep the second sound. Ought to. Ought to. Ought to. Ought to. Ought to. Also, in America, when we have vowel, T, vowel, if they go together really fast, this can change to a flap T. And a flap T in American pronunciation is like a D. So, ought to, ought to, ought to, ought to. Now I've changed it to a flap T. Also, the word to has 7 different pronunciations. Ta, da, ta, da, t, d, and tu. T and d are the most common. We change this to a flap T. Let's make it a d. Oughta. Oughta. You know what you ought to do? You know what you ought to do? You know what you ought to do? This, everybody, is daily American English. This is what we learn in DDM. Yes, we learn it in DD, but in DDM, boom, 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 we study it really hard. This type of sentence, for many of my DDM students, easy. Really? You know what you ought to do? 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 You should go to... So, now we hear more of a U. It's going to be the U sound. You should, very, very short, should, go to. Here again, we're going to use the D sound. Same thing. Oughta, go to, go to. You should go to her office. Now in this sentence, in this word, George keeps the H and the R sound. Her, this is an AW again, her office, office, her office. You should go to her office. Do not say her office. No, 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 no. No touching. Her office. That's the R, not a D, R. If it were a D, her office. No, but we want the R. No touching. Her office. No touching. Her office. You should go to her office. You should go to her office. And this S sound can come over here. And heckle, N, cancels the D sound. Very common. You and I. You and I? No. You and I. The N is a strong sound. The D is a weak sound. The N will kill the D. Heckle and heckle. And now George changes to a New York accent. Huh. Huh. Yeah, that R in New York can be very weak. In Boston too, just like in the UK. What is her name? You spoke to her? Her. Most Americans will say her, her. Here George does say her, and here her. Yeah, isn't that strange? George is from New York. Sometimes New York people say her, sometimes New York people say her. Both are possible. That's one New Yorker who said both. Okay, so heckle is probably a new word for many of you. All right?
Hey, what are you talking about?
Hey, what? Be quiet, I'm teaching a class here.
You don't know what you're talking about. Listen to this guy.
What's that guy doing?
Boo, boo.
That guy is heckling me right now. He's heckling me. This is the idea of heckle. Okay? But I'll talk about that in a second. Let's go ahead and say this together. Let's go slow. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. Beautiful English. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. That's it. Are you saying it with me? Let's say it together and then listen. You ready? 1, 2, 3. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her.
You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her. You know what you ought to do? You should go to her office and heckle her.
All right, so is it easier to hear? I hope so. Yeah, this was confusing. The American typical her and then that really strong New York her, I know. Ought to, know what you oughta. Hopefully you got that. And heckle once again. So you can use a dictionary to double check the meaning of heckle. But this situation, George, the man who's speaking, is giving advice to his friend. His friend is a stand-up comedian. He stands on stage and he tells jokes. So the other day I was walking into a bar and whatever. He tells stupid jokes. Well, in the audience, somebody who's listening to the jokes, ah, that's not funny. Oh, that's ridiculous. That's stupid. That's stupid. Is that nice? No, that's not nice. That person is called a heckler. A heckler, a person who heckles. Now, sometimes maybe heckling is funny, but usually it's not. If I go to a show, a concert, a comedy show, whatever, I don't want to hear a heckler. I want to concentrate on the performer, the instructor, whatever. If he's good, great. If he's bad, whatever. I'm not going to heckle. But some people love to heckle. So anyway, he was heckled. So George says, you know what? Your job is a comedian and this person heckled you. Well, you should go to her office where she does her job and heckle her. So you can imagine the woman is at her office typing a business letter, a marketing letter. And we hope that you will join us in the next marketing conference. And then Jerry, you can't type. That's the worst typing in the world. Look at those fingers. Those are ugly typing fingers. He's heckling her. That's the idea. Do you heckle? Do you ever heckle anybody? When your mom is cooking, she's making stew, she's cutting tomatoes. Oh, Mom, what are you cutting tomatoes like that for? My goodness, Mom, my grandmother cuts tomatoes better than you cut tomatoes. Give me those tomatoes. I'll show you how to cut tomatoes. What is this? Oh, my God, I'm not going to eat that stuff. Tomatoes and blood mixed together. Get out of here, Mom. No, I hope not. Some people might do that. Do you heckle your wife or your husband? I'm sure you do. Now, once again, nagging is very similar to heckling, but the idea of heckle is you're an audience member and somebody is performing. While they are performing, you're shouting. It's not cool. Don't be a heckler. Okay, that's the story. It's really simple. Excellent expression. When you give somebody advice, use this sentence. Grammatically, do you know what you ought to do? We could say, do you know what you should do? Same thing. Do you know what you should do? Many Americans, we do cancel the do. So go ahead. You know what you should do? You know what you ought to do? You know what you should do? You know what you ought to do? Practice the pronunciation, perfect pronunciation. You know what you ought to do? You know what you should do? A little bit faster. You know what you ought to do? You know what you should do? And then give your advice. Do you understand? It's a great, super excellent expression. Get the pronunciation down. Americans love this oughta, really fast pronunciation, so make sure you memorize that sound. That's it, okay? We're gonna listen again. Hopefully it's easy for you, and be strong because DD 260 is coming up. Thanks, guys. Oh, and if you like the lesson, if possible, become a patron if you're not already. Go here, patreon.com/Coach Shane, and you can sign up and help me out as little as $1 a month. It'll come to me and it'll help me out. You are investing in your education and I am paying my bills. Thanks a lot.